Hi everyone, Angela here. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 different methods to sew a really narrow rolled hem, also known as a baby hem. Now I know there's lots of different techniques out there, but these are the 5 that I know, and I'll tell you what I like and don't like about each one. And if you can, try them all out with some scrap fabric. I'm using the Juki TL2010Q sewing machine. The link for this and the tools I use are down in the description below. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, click the link for Echidna Sewing and Juki Junkies for North America. When sewing with fine fabrics, use Microtex needles. These have ultra-sharp slender points that pierce the fabric cleanly rather than pushing the fibers apart. This variety pack has sizes 8 to 12, and I'll be using the size 10 in this video. These needles are color-coded. The tall purple band indicates it's a Microtex needle, while the lower band shows the needle size. My automatic threader works fine with the size 10 needle, but it definitely will not work with the size 8. Be sure to carefully check with your machine. I'm also switching to a thin fabric throat plate with a smaller needle hole. The smaller opening prevents the fabric from being pushed down or eaten by the machine. First, I'm going to use my long screwdriver to remove the screws from the original standard needle plate. You don't have to remove the presser foot, just carefully slide it out from underneath. It's not easy to see, but the needle hole on this standard plate is slightly larger. I've marked the back of the thin plate so it's easy to identify. To remove this standard plate, flip it over and you'll see small grooves at each end. Also under the plate is a tension clip. Lift the left corner so that the pin is out of the groove, then carefully push down and up on the clip to separate. Next, we need to get the pins into the grooves on this thin plate. We also have to make sure that the metal piece on the left is underneath this clip. This next step is just a bit tricky. Hold the left side steady and place the clip on top of the metal piece. Push down on the clip while placing the pin into the groove. Then lift the left corner and place that pin into the groove. The plates will be connected just on a slight angle. Carefully slide the plate back in and flatten it down while tightening the screws. I'm shortening the stitch length just a little to 2 1/4. For the first hand-rolled method, I'll be using a piece of chiffon with a straight edge, a curved edge, and a French seam in the center so that you know it's the wrong side. When you roll a French seam twice, it becomes a bit thick with all those layers. What you can do is first stitch across the seam just less than 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Trim the threads, then carefully trim away the seam allowance beside the stitching. This will be a bit easier to stitch over when folded. Pull up the bobbin thread so you can hold on to it. With the wrong side up, fold over the hem 1/8 of an inch twice. Using just the standard presser foot, have the top fold of the hem in line with the inner left side. Lower the needle, hold on to the thread ends, and backstitch. Continue folding the edge over twice 1/8 of an inch or narrower if you can, keeping the hem nice and even. Tuck any frayed edges in so they're enclosed neatly inside the hem. It's a lot harder to trim after the hem is sewn. At the seam, hold the fabric behind the needle and gently pull to help it feed evenly over the seam. At the end, use an awl to help you keep the hem folded evenly. Don't automatically cut the thread, instead lift the needle and foot, pull out a few inches before trimming it. This way you'll have some ends to hold on to again. To sew the next edge, carefully fold the corner twice, keeping the raw edges tucked inside. Lower the needle slightly past the edge, hold the thread ends, sew a couple of stitches forward, then backstitch just over the edge. Fold the hem twice and then pull on the thread ends to help stitch over the corner. Sewing the curved edge is slightly trickier. Start by folding and sewing the corner the same way as before. What makes it tricky is that the outer edge of the curve is longer than the inner edge. You need to gently stretch the inner area as you fold and sew the outer hem, easing it in slightly. Now, depending on the section you're sewing, you may not need to stretch the fabric. At the seams, you can also just trim it on an angle. This method isn't easy. It takes quite a bit of practice to fold a narrow, even hem and to get a feel for how fine fabrics behave. For a narrow hem, I personally can't fold it much less than 1/8 of an inch wide. For more control, you can also use this method in 2 steps. With the wrong side up, start by folding the edge over as small as you can, about 1/8 of an inch or less. Not much wider than the opening of the presser foot. Lower the needle, hold on to the thread ends, and stitch right beside the fold. Have the folded edge in line with the inner right side of the presser foot. Use an awl or the point of your clippers to help you fold the edge over as narrow as possible. Depending on your fabric, you don't need to trim the seams when using this method. There's no need to backstitch at the end, just go back to the start and fold again as narrow as possible. This time, have the top fold of the hem in line with the inner left side of the foot. Lower the needle, hold on to the thread ends, and start with a backstitch. Stitch right beside the fold and just to the left of the first stitch line. Again, tuck in any frayed edges. This method is a lot easier to control the narrow folds. You can see how narrow you can fold it compared to this pin. You can sew the corners and a curved edge the same way. For the second method, I'll be using this piece of organza. Now I'm just going to assume that you have a 5/8 of an inch hem allowance. Whatever your hem allowance is, fold over that amount less than 1/8 of an inch. So in this case, I'm folding over 1/2 inch with the wrong side up. If you're doing alterations, just fold 1/8 of an inch longer than your marked finish line. Stitch as close as you can to the fold. For this method, I'm going to sew around the corners and along the curved edge. For the corners, stop 1/2 inch before the next edge, lift the presser foot and pivot. Fold over the next edge, then pull out the extra fabric from underneath the corner. Stitch across, and I'll repeat with the next corner. When you're folding along the curve, don't worry that the outer edge is wavy, just make sure that the fold is flat. If you're finding this video helpful, make sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on all notifications, and leave a comment below. As always, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. You can also show your support by becoming a member. Again, the wavy raw edge is normal, the stitching along the folds should be nice and flat, and the corners should also be nice and neat without any pleating. Place the hem underneath the presser foot to hold in place. I'm using my favorite Kai 6-inch embroidery scissors for the trimming. They're super sharp and really comfortable to use. Trim away the excess fabric as close as possible to the stitching, being careful not to cut it. The closer you can trim to the stitching, the narrower you can fold the hem. At the seams, be sure to only trim away the bottom section. At the corners, carefully trim away so there's no excess. Back at the start, fold again as narrow as possible, stitch right beside the fold just to the left of the first stitch line. What's great about this method is that it's easier to fold a slightly wider hem, and there's minimal fraying since the excess is trimmed away after the stitching secures the fabric. Before you get to the corner, fold up the bottom and then carefully fold the rest of the edge on top. Stitch right to the inner corner, have the needle down, and pivot. Place a pin into the fabric just behind the needle and use it to gently pull as you stitch the corner. To sew the curved edge, continue folding as narrow as possible. This hem is slightly narrower than the last one. It's a great method without needing any special presser feet. This is a rolled hem presser foot to create a 1/16 of an inch wide hem. As far as I know, this is the narrowest you can get. There's a spiral guide that curls the fabric edge under itself twice as it feeds through. I'll be using this soft satin without any seams. With the wrong side up, insert the fabric edge into the spiral. Fold over so that it lines up with this inner edge, and then carefully push it through the guide and under the foot. Sew a couple of back stitches and then hold on to the thread ends to help pull it through. These really narrow presser feet can take a little practice to get used to at first, as there's a bit of a learning curve. It's really important to fold the fabric edge over the correct amount. If it's too little, it doesn't get turned under, and if it's too much, the raw edge ends up showing. You may also have to deal with the edges constantly fraying. Sewing a curve, again, is a little trickier as you need to ease the fabric in. You'll need to continually lift the presser foot to adjust the fabric edge. You'll also have to take it out of the spiral to sew corners and over seams. I think this foot is great for straight hems. As you can see, it looks really nice. I don't love it for curved hems, as you can get these tiny little pleats, but it doesn't show on the right side. Also, you can't pass a seam through the foot, and corners are really difficult. You may have seen videos with hems done with something called band roll waistband interfacing. What I have here is a bit different. It's sold as Fishbone hemming tape. It's loosely woven, and the crosswise strands wrap around the edges. First, you need to cut a length a little bit more than the total width of your hem. Then carefully trim away the finished edge, keeping the cut nice and even along a lengthwise strand. Next, remove the lengthwise strand to expose the ends of the crosswise strands. You want to remove enough lengthwise strands so that the ends measure the width you want your hem. I'll remove 2 for an 1/8 of an inch hem. Have your fabric with the right side up. Place the tape on top with the ends slightly past the fabric and the edges aligned. You need to stitch right beside the lengthwise strand and not over it. Keep adjusting the tape to match the edges. Turn over to the wrong side of the fabric and carefully fold over the edge of the tape, being careful not to pull out the ends. To edge stitch the hem, have this fold in line with the inner left side of the presser foot. Gently pull on the fabric so that the ends of the tape sit right against the folded edge of the fabric and the hem is nice and even. The stiff ends act like little fingers holding everything in place. You just have to be careful not to pull the tape out before edge stitching. Now pull the tape out from the hem. If any ends were caught by the needle, hold the fabric edge securely and give the tape a gentle tug. Using the tape really helps with sewing corners. Again, stitch onto the right side and turn over as before. Those little ends really help the corner fabric stay tucked under securely. To sew a curved hem, again, start with the fabric right side up. Stitch just like before, aligning the ends of the tape with the edge of the fabric. Keep adjusting the fabric that's in front of the presser foot and place the tape on top. This can be a little fiddly depending on your curve, but the tape is pretty flexible. Turn over to the wrong side and edge stitch close to the fold. Keep adjusting the fabric underneath, making sure that the hem is really flat and not twisted. You shouldn't end up with any little pleats as long as you keep the hem really narrow. It's nice that the tape is reusable, but sewing the curved hems just feels a little awkward. I had a bit of clear curtain tape and I wanted to test this out. I trimmed away the edge and removed a few strands, but because it's clear, it's a little bit difficult to see. It's not as stiff as the Fishbone hemming tape, but it sews up really well, and when removing it, it slides out easily. I would say even smoother than the hemming tape. I also tested some of my leftover metallic Christmas ribbon. The lengthwise strands in this ribbon are really fine and clear. To prepare it, I only trimmed away the edge. I didn't pull out any strands. This is a narrower version of the same type of ribbon. Again, I'm just trimming away the finished edge. Stitch the same way and gently pull out the ribbon. On this sample, I'm just sewing a scant 1/4 inch hem. The ribbon pulls away easily, leaving the fine strands inside the hem. You can leave the strands inside or easily pull them out. I'm not sure how it'll wash if left inside. I'm sewing a smaller 1/8 of an inch hem with the narrow ribbon. It's just as easy to handle and pull away. If left inside, the strands simply add a little extra body and stiffness to the hem. It's not as stiff as adding fishing line or horsehair braid. Something I never throw away is tissue paper, so whenever I get it with my purchases, I always keep it. You can also buy white tissue paper for gift wrapping. Fold up the length of your tissue paper and cut into strips. Just cut them roughly about 2 inches wide. There's no need to join them or anything, just keep them on hand. Start by sewing a couple of stitches down the center of the tissue. With the wrong side up, fold the edge of the fabric over 1/2 an inch. Have the fold in line with the inner right side of the presser foot. For a super narrow hem, stitch as close as possible to the fold. At the end, stitch past the fabric onto the tissue and then carefully trim away the excess as close as possible to the stitching. Now fold the hem again along the raw edge. Don't pull the right side of the tissue paper too much, otherwise the fold ends up being along the stitch line. The hem should feel flat and you should be able to see the edge of the fabric to the right of the stitch line. Begin by stitching on the tissue first and make sure the hem is flat. Have the top fold of the hem in line with the inner left side of the presser foot and stitch just to the left of the previous stitch line. It's surprising how much control tissue paper gives you when you're sewing a tiny hem. Fold the tissue paper together, then gently pull along the stitch line to remove it. You can reuse these strips. For a corner, fold and stitch as before, trim off the excess and fold over again. Again, start your stitching on the tissue paper, sew a couple of stitches just onto the fabric, then backstitch, making sure to catch the edge. Continue stitching, remove the tissue paper, and trim the threads. Starting the stitching on the tissue paper prevents any bird nesting. To sew curved hems, roll your tissue paper into a loose cone shape and cut it into strips. Fold, stitch, and trim as before. If you're finding it a bit difficult to trim the fabric, you can stretch and pin the hem down and trim it that way. Fold the hem over again and sew the second stitch line. To keep the tissue paper laying flat, you can tear it along the right side. For the narrowest possible hem, this method gives you complete control. Let me know down in the comments how you sew your narrow hems and whether you'll give any of these methods a try. Be sure to check out some of my other tutorials. Thanks for watching, take care, and happy sewing!